So in my last video, I reviewed the classic comic book film Batman from 1989, so of course I had to follow it up by talking about Batman Returns, Tim Burton's classic, which this time features Batman going up against Penguin and Catwoman. And in this video, I have lots to say. I will just be completely honest, there is so much I have to say about this film. Of course I'm going to talk in spoilers because this film is from the early 90s. I assume most of you have seen it, and make sure to check out my review of Batman 1989 and all my future Batman videos because I'm going to be talking about all the live action ones from the 90s, so that also includes Batman and Robin, unfortunately, and then I'll have a special video out about the Dark Knight trilogy, which I'm very excited. And of course I'm doing this because my most anticipated film of all time is coming out very soon, The Batman. I cannot wait to see that film March 2nd. But anyway, we're going to talk about Batman Returns. Now, this film is really divisive, I find. Nowadays, people either really don't like it at all or they absolutely love it. I've heard a ton of people say this is their favorite Batman film, and for me, I of course highly disagree here. I do prefer the 1989 one and of course every film in the Dark Knight trilogy and some other ones which I might talk about one day. Maybe I'll make a top 5, top 10 Batman movies one day. That includes the animated ones as well. But this movie is solid, although it's not really great, but of course it's not bad. There is so much about this film that I love. I watched the movie like 2 nights ago, and it took me this long to film my review because I had to really sit and think on some things because there was so much I need to talk about. If I haven't already said it, spoiler warning, of course, this film came out in the early 90s. I think I did say that. But in this film, we have Catwoman, Penguin, and Batman, and I'll start off positive, and that is that the performances all are great. Michael Keaton, of course, returns as Bruce Wayne and Batman, and he is so good. I love him in the original. I love him here. There's more about his character that I will talk about in a bit. He is great. Michelle Pfeiffer is also amazing as Catwoman. A lot of people consider her the definitive one, at least for live action, and I'd say I agree so far, although I think the new one will probably take the crown here, but she is amazing here. Weird, definitely over the top at times, but it makes sense. And again, there's more about her character that I need to talk about later, and that's kind of how I feel about all the characters in this movie. And then we have the Penguin played by none other than the great, the legendary Danny DeVito, who I've always really loved just as a person, as an actor. But here he is great as the Penguin, but once again the character writing is lacking, but all the performances are great. This movie is slightly over 2 hours, definitely drags at times, but I will say when watching the movie I always really admire the performances because they all go for it so much. I mean, there's a lot in this movie that tons of young kids should not have seen, including myself, because of course I watched this movie when I was very young, same with all the Batman movies I could that had been released at the time. I kind of talked more about that in my 1989 review, like Batman 1989, so I don't want to repeat myself 100% here, but this movie is one that I've watched ever since a child, and there's been many things about this movie that I've always remembered, but it had been probably a good 5 or 6 years since I had seen it fully, and watching it again, I noticed a lot of the great things, but a lot of the major problems here. Now, the acting is great across the board, and Tim Burton was basically given full creative control, and of course, he made it full of Tim Burtonisms, and I hope that makes sense, but I love Tim Burton. He's always been one of my favorite directors, probably honestly, maybe in the top 5, definitely in the top 10. I love him so much. I love his movies. This one is definitely not up there with some of his other movies, but there's a lot of great things. I mean, the costume design's amazing. The way the movie looks is gorgeous, whether they're underground with the Penguin, in Gotham, great in buildings, lots of color and stuff, and on 4K. It looks great, just like this 1989 transfer. I mean, it looks so good. The fact that it's from the early 90s still, it'll always blow my mind when they do that, but it looks really good. The movie looks good, the acting's good, but the character writing, like, it sucks. I'm going to be completely honest. It is not good. Penguin is an interesting character, I'd say, for what I know about him. I will say I don't know much about him when it comes to like comparing him to the comics. When you talk about like Catwoman, I will kind of dive more into her in a bit because I do know more about her and Batman, of course. But Penguin, I don't know much about, so I think that his performance was good. I just didn't really care for a lot of his stuff, and sometimes his motives, they kind of like flip-flop. They kind of go back and forth, and for me, that kind of just gets annoying. It gets to a certain point where Max, who's played by the great Christopher Walken, who of course is very good in this movie, very evil, very menacing, like in certain ways when compared to some of the other characters here. Their contrast is good. I like the way they work together. I think that the stuff with him, Selena, and then the connection with Penguin is good, but this movie kind of just, I feel like thinks it's better than it is. Like when it comes to script wise, I feel like they were going for something, and in scenes it worked. There are so many moments here that I think are great, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, but when it comes to the overall movie, there are plenty of moments where I do not care at all what's going on. The whole thing about making Penguin mayor and stuff, like, I've never cared about that. I'm going to be completely honest. I know a lot of people probably love that. I don't get it. I don't really know where that idea sprouted from, I guess, in the writing room and stuff like that. It's just kind of weird. I like the whole finding your identity and stuff, but he finds it really early on, and then he kind of just goes from it, but then by the end flips back to it, and it never really makes sense. And Catwoman, I think, here is interesting. I definitely prefer her, like, year one style of stuff, where she comes from a much harsher line of work, and then she becomes Catwoman because of many things, and I think that's what they're going to do in the Batman, so I'm very excited for that. Here, her being the secretary and kind of losing it from there and getting pushed out of the window, but then getting revived by cats, it hasn't always made perfect sense, but her building her costume and stuff and stitching it up, and a lot of her performance is great, iconic, weird, and overly sexual, definitely, but that's kind of just the whole movie. And my one defense about the comment of it being overly, sexual saturated, whatever you want to say, is that Tim Burton explores lust here very well. You have someone who finally, feels alive again, kind of like Jekyll and Hyde in a way, and then you have someone who really hasn't interacted with regular people, take that as you will, in 30, 33 years or whatever it is, and they're both lustful in different ways. I'm going to use that word a lot because I think it's a great word to describe the characters, and you get some weird things in this movie. I'm going to show her my French flipper trick and stuff like that. It's really weird, but there are sequences where you can tell that these two are almost like deprived of a lot of the love that they need, and I think that the way that's explored is really good, and there are so many moments here where that really shines. But then there's other scenes where they don't care at all about the themes. I don't really know who wrote this movie. I can't remember exactly. I don't think it was Burton, though, but I do know he had full creative control, so that's why it looks like a Tim Burton movie and stuff like that, but I don't think he wrote it, because I know he doesn't write all his movies. I know he didn't write Batman 1989, so I don't think he would have wrote this one, but the whole villain stuff can work at times, but the movie just drags on with those boring plots. I mean, this movie is more of a Catwoman or Penguin movie than it is about the title character, Batman. And again, that's one of my biggest complaints with this movie, is that there really is no Batman. The first time he's on screen is 13 minutes into the movie, which could be fine, but then you barely see him, and his scenes are really cool. It gave birth to that iconic Batman meme of this face right here, and there are so many great fight scenes, and his chemistry with Catwoman and stuff is really interesting, but again, there's just a better version of it out there, which I assume we'll see soon in live action, or you can just read the comics, and I think that's what makes movies special, is when, especially if they're like adapted or inspired by a comic or something like that, is if there's something different in it. But this movie kind of just took the least interesting parts of some of the comics and put it up onto a movie. Now, if you can kind of cut through the layers and peel them back and see into these themes, I think that's great, but I just wish there were more themes explored in this movie than just lust, because there's definitely overkill at times. There are some scenes which just, it's like, why? This is technically for kids. Kids can watch it. It's PG-13. It's like, why? But I have defense of that. So there are many things in this movie, which I know this review is kind of like more of a rant, but I flip-flop on a lot of the points. I think this movie is good enough. I watch it not nearly as much as Batman 1989 or any of the films in the Dark Knight trilogy. It's not at all one of my favorite Batman movies, but it is perfectly watchable and enjoyable at times. There are a bunch of great sequences. The action here is great. The stunt work is great. The practical effects, everything. There's just so many story inconsistencies and character writing that is really lacking, and character development that just isn't there, and I just don't care about what I'm seeing on screen sometimes, and that's what really takes away from movies for me. I like this movie overall, although it is nowhere near some of the other Batman films. Batman Returns is a step down from the original, but still a solid film overall. Burton's themes and subtle darkness are so strong here, but the undeveloped characters and lack of Batman bring this one down. For me, I'm going to give Batman Returns a 3 out of 5. Now, if you love this movie, please let me know why down below. I know a lot of people have great videos on YouTube, and I actually watched some before this, kind of explaining why, and I tried to understand, and I really wish I could love this movie, because of course I want to love every movie that I see, especially if it's a Batman movie, and because so many people love it, I wish I did, but I like it. I think that that's a good opinion. I can side with basically both sides of it. I can be like, I can see where you're coming from, but I can also see where you're coming from. Good, bad. It's in the middle. It's a solid film overall, but make sure to come back soon for my review of Batman Forever, which, honestly, looks a lot better when it's followed by Batman vs. Robin. But anyway, thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Over and out.